Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third Period Power Project workshop. My name is Eleanor Regal, and this is the workshop on LGBTQ plus menstrual experiences. And we have an expert with us today who I will introduce in just a bit. Let's get started. Just as usual, a quick intro about me and my Gold Award project and to check up on where I am in it. Then I'm going to talk about some terms that are going to be used in this workshop that might not be familiar for everybody. Then I will introduce to you Aiden Aizumi. He will give a presentation on LGBTQ plus menstrual experiences, and we're very glad to have him here today. And then we're going to do a Q&A section and our conclusions. First, a little bit about me and my project. My name is Eleanor Regal. I am a Girl Scout ambassador from Los Angeles in the GSGLA service unit in the council. And I am doing my Gold Award project on menstruation education and surveys, breaking down taboo and breaking down stigma, just bringing discussions to everybody, even though they can be uncomfortable sometimes. I presented my project to the council, got it approved, and have done a survey for menstruators and non-menstruators, and that has almost 200 responses so far. And I'm now working on the workshops portion of my Gold Award. So this is the third of 5 workshops. Again, some quick facts: 199 people have responded. Very, very close to my 200 goal. So check back in next time. We'll see if we have exceeded my expected goal. 5 workshops. This is the middle of them. Of course, I have a website that I have shared my survey responses on, and I will soon be sharing the recordings of these workshops. I also have an Instagram where I share period facts, post about my workshop, and post just general project updates. So the second part, these are some terms that people might not be familiar with, might be clunky to use for some people. First up, trans woman. A trans woman is a woman who was assigned male at birth and is now identifying as a woman. That is their choice, and we should respect that their pronouns and use the words to refer to them that they ask us to use. Trans man. A trans man is a man who was assigned female at birth and is now a man. Assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth, I use those words a couple times. That means the gender that it says on your birth certificate. Let's not make assumptions all the time. That is not always what people want to be referred to as. LGBTQ plus. This is in the title of my workshop. It stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and more. The plus stands for plenty of other letters, as you can see on the bottom: LGBTQQIP 2SAA plus. Was one of the longest acronyms I could find, but all of those letters stand for something important. So feel free to do more research into the many different terms and many different acronyms if you are interested. Menstruator. Again, I use this word a lot. It features very heavily in my workshops. A menstruator is a person of any gender who has a period. I use this word to be gender inclusive because there are sometimes men who have periods, sometimes women who do not have periods, and using a term like woman to refer to everyone who has a period can be wrong sometimes. That it doesn't apply to everybody. Non-binary. Non-binary is an umbrella term. It means someone who is not female or male. And just to go into a little bit more about what that means, there's a big umbrella of transgender and a smaller umbrella inside that of non-binary. And non-binary is not a third gender. It is a collection of many different identities. So a couple of them: genderqueer, gender fluid, agender, two-spirit, omnigender, bigender. So there's a bunch of different terms. And if somebody prefers to be referred to as one of those things. If that's what they identify as, then that is what we should call them. That's how we should respect them. So next up is Aiden's presentation. So Aiden Aizumi is going to give a presentation, a little bit about him. He is a Japanese American trans man, activist, and storyteller. He has worked with a variety of schools, universities, organizations, and businesses to have conversations around gender identity, the LGBTQ plus community, and creating more inclusive and welcoming spaces. Aiden hopes those conversations help to create a more loving, empathetic, and inclusive world for LGBTQ plus people and their families. So please give him a warm welcome as he presents his presentation. All right, you can take it away.
Sounds good. Cool. All right. Can folks hear me okay? Sounds okay. All right. Awesome. Can folks see that okay? All right. Cool. Right on. So thanks, Eleanor, for just letting me have the opportunity to share a little bit about my experience and kind of, it is one experience, I want to say. It is my own. And then a lot of this is based on conversation that I've had with folks and just my experience as a trans person. But I suppose at first meeting, people would probably wonder why I might be sharing this with you all. And it's just because I am a trans man. So I was born assigned female at birth. And so I have a little bit of a different experience than somebody who might have been born assigned male at birth and who identifies as cisgender. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about my story. And then we can talk a little bit more about kind of more things around LGBTQ plus specific things that might come up as challenges for folks. So let's see here. So I did mention I was born assigned female at birth. I'm adopted. I was born in Japan. I grew up here in the United States and raised here in Southern California. And this might happen too. I'm at my office and my lights might turn off, so I might have to turn those back on really quick. But I was born assigned female at birth. And for the first 20 years of my life, that is really how I interacted with the world and how the world interacted with me. And I definitely struggled a lot in my childhood and in growing up with balancing masculinity and femininity. I was really more of what I would say is a tomboy. I was not what society, I think, would have expected of a young girl growing up. And I'm in my 30s, so this would have been the early 90s. And so I definitely broke a lot of already sort of the social expectations that were sort of set upon me, right? Being born assigned female at birth. And so I very much was into the things my younger brother was into. At that point in time, it was a lot of Power Rangers, and I really wanted his like car and fire truck collection. He had a really cool, I just remember a really huge red fire engine that was all metal and really cool. And I wanted it, but it was for boys. And so there were some limitations to some of those things that I had access to at that time in my life. As I grew up and sort of hit adolescence, or for me, I guess like the age of puberty, I distinctly remember starting 7th grade and feeling sort of crampy, I guess. And I just thought I had some kind of a stomach ache. And I got home and realized I had started my period. And I sort of knew that was sort of coming at some point based on that 5th grade health class that I think we have to take. And I found uncomfortable then. And I think probably for different reasons. I think it was uncomfortable for everybody. But for me, I think I didn't realize where that discomfort was really coming from. And it was coming from my relationship with my body, my relationship with identifying as a woman and not. And at that point in time in my life, I did not know about the transgender community. I did not know, and had not gotten to a place of accepting my own gender identity. And so it was more just uncomfortable for unknown reasons, really. So I remember hitting sort of that day, first day of 7th grade, and getting home and thankfully kind of remembering that there was things I should do or ask for. And so I had told my mom, and she was kind enough to run to the store for me and get me so I think my first pack of like pads that I needed. But it did start for me a long wave and journey of a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression. because I started to, my body started to change in ways that I don't think aligned for me, right? And so I hadn't really prepared myself for that. I had not mentally made that connection yet about my gender. And so as things were changing, of course, and just like as my hormones were changing in general, like that's a lot of change, right, to be happening and to manage. So I started to really struggle, anxiety and depression. Um, and the more my body changed and the more I kind of tried to hide those things, I would wear like really, really baggy clothes and like really really tight fitting like sports bras, because at that time there wasn't something I could use to really like bind my chest, which is something some trans masculine folks and non-binary folks might do just to flatten and masculinize the chest. So that's all I could do at the time, was kind of to try to hide the way my body was changing. um, but it was definitely very uncomfortable for me. I also did come out in high school, just so not related to this necessarily, but prior to transitioning, I actually did come out. And I originally thought that I was a lesbian. I had, again, no idea about the transgender community. And so I came out my sophomore year of high school and kind of tried to process some of that too, along with just figuring out this relationship now with my body as it started to change and become uh, maybe more feminine, I guess is the right word. Uh, So I did mention I was 20 when I came out the second time. I consider it like an improvement or an evolution. I was like a version 2.0 of myself, and came out and told my family and I told my friends that I, was sort of um, unaware that I could identify anything differently than what I was assigned at birth. And so when I did learn that, and I did some soul searching for several years, because I came out when I was 15, and then I didn't come out again until I was 20. I wrote them a letter, and I just explained to them who I was and why this mattered to me, and that I hoped they were going to be, loving and accepting, which is kind of how I'm connected to PFLAG, the organization that I'm currently chapter president of. Is that my parents sought support there and sought resources and education, and so I became connected to that chapter. Um, After coming out, I did start on testosterone, and um, I kind of wished, I think I had a misconception about what that was going to do for me. But it took a while for me to stop having a period. And in that time between coming out and that happening, it's kind of a psychological battle, because it was always this constant reminder of my connection to a gender that I really did not associate with, and that the world, really does connect to being um, a woman's experience, and it's a very gendered experience. And so it took about 6 months for me to get to that point. And then after that, I did end up having a hysterectomy several years into my transition for other medical reasons that my doctors felt was appropriate, and that was the appropriate move for me. Um, but hormones did ultimately stop me from having a period after about 6 months. So I don't even think I've ever talked about having a period so much. um, so a little bit more, I think, about specifically about LGBTQ folks and the connection and sort of relationship with menstruation. And before I start this, I'm going to fix the lights really quick, because they are guaranteed to go off. So a little bit about this, specifically for trans and non-binary folks, or folks maybe who identify as intersex. Periods are a little bit tricky to navigate. I fully, Eleanor and I were talking about this before, kind of, but we were discussing how this is just an uncomfortable topic for a lot of folks. And I think there's just extra layers to that. So it's not to say that it's, more challenging or more difficult than someone else's experience, but there's just different aspects to it that I think make it a little bit tricky when you're navigating this in current societal standards, right, with current societal limitations. So why is this tricky? For trans folks and non-binary folks specifically, it can set off what we refer to as gender dysphoria. And so that is the distress that somebody is feeling when the sex that they were assigned at birth, so in my case, female, does not align with my gender identity, which is male. Um, During times of my period, I know for me that was more intense, and it's just because, right, I would feel like bloated. At that point in time, I had not had any sort of um, trans affirming surgeries, and so my breasts would, right, be tender. They would be more swollen. I couldn't really bind my chest at that point because it was really uncomfortable then. And so these things were then just kind of intensified during times when I would have my period because of how my gender identity, how I identify, right, as male. And so this makes it, right, again, tricky to navigate. Another reason why this can be really tricky for folks is it is a very triggering experience, because based on societal norms, periods are still very much considered a women's only issue. And so when it's gendered in that way, right, it's a constant reminder of that experience, and that it's not the gender I identify with, it's an unwanted experience, because of that connection to being the gender that I don't identify with. And so it just makes it a little bit harder when you're trying to navigate um, in those spaces and trying to make it through those, let's say 5 to 7 days or so. Um, and you're already being reminded about these things about your body and the fact that you are not maybe in the body that you most identify with. So I do want to say, just for as like a sort of a note, right, that this in general is not uniquely a trans or gender diverse experience, right? There are many cisgender women, right? So women who are born assigned female at birth who also identify as female, that feel very uncomfortable, right? Or are very uninterested in their period, and that's completely fine and valid. And this is more just to say this is a different lens and perspective. So it isn't uniquely trans, right? But it is this gender dysphoria piece is the part that's a little bit unique. So some challenges alongside with sort of the why this is tricky to navigate. As we all know, I'm sure, and my wife, I just know from going to the store with her at this point, but there is sometimes a lack of access for trans folks, trans men or non-binary folks, who do need to access menstruation products, um, because of the cost, and then they don't have access to potentially free products that are available in women's spaces. So I know, like, I think when I was in college, there was, women's health department that you could just get free tampons and free pads at. Um, at the school that I work for, we offer those, right, for free to our students, um, if they need them or want them. If you are someone like myself and I'm needing to access, or I'm not able to afford uh, to buy these products on my own, it would be very uncomfortable and difficult for me to walk into a women's health center and say I need to get, some tampons, because one, they'll probably think I'm joking around, which then makes it even more uncomfortable, right, for me as the trans person going in there. And then again, just sort of reinforces that idea that it's a women's only issue, and that because of how I present my body, people are assuming I may not also need access to those products. The second sort of challenge around, for trans and non-binary folks, is a safety concern, and also inadequate medical care. So a lot of trans folks, myself included, I am guilty of this, but of avoiding sort of going to the doctor or avoiding seeking out medical care, because it does require me then to sort of out myself, potentially puts me in unsafe situations, situations where people are not going to be as kind, right, to me because of how I identify. And so there's a lot of layers to that, right? You're talking about now, like, I have to go and out myself, which is going to be uncomfortable. I'm also going to have to ask for these things and probably get some kind of exam done to my body that is, again, the wording and stuff used around it is for women's bodies, and so it creates a lot of barriers for folks. um let's see here. So just some things that can be done. aside from learning, like in this sort of space that Eleanor has created for everybody. Um, these are just more, I guess, kind of a starting place, right? Every person's experience is going to be a little bit different. Folks may feel affirmed or comforted in different ways that I might not have listed here. Um, but to help ease the process for trans and non-binary folks, I know there's been this push, and I think it's really great. But finding gender neutral period products. So I know Always removed. I think they had like the Venus symbol traditionally on their products. They removed that to make it slightly more inclusive. Um, there's a company called Aunt Flo that doesn't use it uses gender neutral language in their products, as well as Glad Rag, and there's another company called Isle, and they offer more gender neutral and even some slightly masculine products for folks whose gender identities are not distinctly female. And so I think finding products like that does help to slightly ease that process of having to go buy something that's not packaged in a bright pink plastic shrink wrap thing and everything very like woman centered. It for someone like myself, that would just help me to access products in a way that doesn't um, trigger me in the same way. And then finding self-care routines. So um, I found it most helpful to build up sort of a gender affirming activities or social groups or things into my routine, knowing that, I was probably going to have a period in about a month or so, and that to psychologically prepare myself for that, to build this into my self-care. And so I would kind of try to find other trans or non-binary folks to kind of be in community with. I would definitely be prepared with um, things to help with pain relief, because the pain was also then, right, this constant reminder. So if I could sort of help to mitigate the pain, that helped to not set off as much dysphoria for me. And then I would try to use different words to name, right, this experience for myself that felt most comfortable for me. And that's going to be different for every person, right? And so just as an example though, right, is just kind of saying, right, that menstruation is just an issue for people, right? It's just a people issue. It's not a women's only issue or women's issue. And so for me to just change the language I use and how I associated with my period, that helped me to, it didn't completely resolve any sort of dysphoria that it created for me and my body, but it did help to relieve some of it so that it wasn't quite as intense, because that's a lot to go through every month until potentially, for me at least, hormones took effect. But for some folks who transition, that interest in taking hormones isn't there. So this may very well be part of their experience ongoing. And so to try to build into this routine to help offset that psychological impact is just, is important. And just as like a note, but it's like not all women, right? Not all women menstruate, and not all people who menstruate identify as women. So just kind of keeping that in mind helps to create a little bit more of an inclusive, I think, conversation around having a period. I do just have some resources here for folks that are not necessarily related to um, menstruation or your period, but just around LGBTQ stuff. There's two in there because I mentioned them, but so PFLAG, which is the organization that I do work with, provides support for parents and families who have LGBTQ plus children or family members. And so we have a monthly support group meeting, as well as there's resources available online to read. The Trevor Project is a youth suicide prevention network to help with LGBTQ plus youth and suicide prevention. I mentioned Aunt Flo, and then there's an app for tracking, I guess, your period called the Clue app. They are intentionally using gender neutral language as much as possible in their app, and so it makes for tracking your period one, I guess, if you're going to do that, less triggering because it doesn't constantly have things that might remind you. They do give a disclaimer. There's certain parts that they do use the word female because there wasn't really a way around it, but it's not in the app itself generally. So kind of a gender neutral, trans friendly app. And then there is a restroom website for finding like gender neutral or single stall restrooms, because for trans folks, right, sometimes this is an issue. I know for me, like prior to my period stopping, if I was in the men's restroom and I took a tampon with me and I dropped it on the floor, that was potentially problematic in that situation. And so I would seek out either single stall restrooms or gender neutral restrooms. And so there's actually a website where folks can log those in and you can rate them. So you type in your zip code and it'll tell you where restrooms are locally to you that you can access. And then the LA LGBT Center, they offer a lot of resources, of course, for LGBTQ folks. And so those are just some local resources as well as ones online. I also have my contact information here. If folks have any follow-up questions or things that come to mind, you're welcome to reach out to me directly. And I, of course, will just leave this information too with Eleanor. And if folks reach out separately, can always pass that on to them. And yes, I wear my hat proudly in that picture anywhere I can. And I actually have tickets in the supporter section, so I'm big fan. So yeah, any questions folks have, or you can ask them in the chat too. I will stop sharing my screen so I can see all your faces a little better. And then I can see the chat again because I have to pull it out separately. So.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for that, for your presentation. I saw a lot of messages that were like, thank you for sharing, that this is super important. So yeah, if anyone would like to ask questions now, you can feel free to do so. I'll actually start off with one. I know we mentioned this before. If you want to have a discussion with a family member or a close friend who was assigned female at birth, and you are just interested in, talking with them about periods, but are worried that that might make them feel uncomfortable or that might be triggering for them, what are your thoughts on potential ways to discuss that with them?
Yeah, so I am a big believer in, I guess it's a balance. The difficult thing, and I did mention this before, is that a lot of folks will avoid health care or medical providers because of that discomfort. And I think that having conversations around, menstruation and your period is important to have. However, it is a very triggering experience for folks. I'm in a very different place now, right, than I was when I first came out. And so this for me is, I can talk about this now and I'm okay, right? This is not causing me distress. But that's going to be different for somebody else. And so I do recommend having a conversation, I think is important because of health, because of the health of your body. But I think it should be accompanied by other resources, potentially mental health support and some kind of supplemental support, because this can be very difficult. This can be very psychologically distressing for folks. And so, it's important, I think, to take care of our bodies, to go to the doctor, to get exams that need to happen despite how uncomfortable they are. But to do it in a way that then is, hopefully the least traumatic, I guess, for that person, right?
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? You can put them in the chat or raise your hand.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, it was because there's a couple different ways folks can have sort of a similar procedure, but I had basically my uterus, ovaries, and cervix removed. And again, for me, that was less by choice, more by doctor recommendation. But I was having weird symptoms that should not have been happening. And so my doctors decided that was going to be, for my body, for my health, to be the best course of action for me.
Did I see you had a hand up, Margaret? Or Stephanie? Yes, Margaret, go ahead.
She's muted.
Oh, I think you're still muted.
Yeah, There we go. There we go.
I don't have a question because I think I don't know enough to have a question. But I want to say this is total learning to me. And I liked the fact Eleanor, you had the terms on the screen, and I thank you, Aiden, because I feel like a whole door has been opened here. And so I appreciate your very clear and understanding and understandable presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, Stephanie, go ahead.
Again, Aiden, thank you so much. I mean, I can't imagine a situation where your body is being an enemy to you and kind of making you feel so unhappy, you know, whether monthly or, you know, just all the time. And so I really, again, I'm thankful for your sharing. My question is on the opposite side, and you probably certainly don't necessarily know yourself, but maybe in the community you're supporting and your friends. Have you had experiences, or do you know about friends who didn't have periods and now are, or like what that experience might be like? Or I just wondered if you had anything to share on the other side of that.
I guess I don't necessarily, maybe not specifically. I do know I have friends who identify as trans women who have had gender affirming surgery, and it does actually require them to wear or use pads after as that healing process is taking place. And again, it's just like access to these items in a way that feels right, comfortable for folks. But I don't, yeah, a lot of folks, I feel like I'm sure there are more people's experiences that do probably highlight some of that. Aside from the surgery side of things, I know that that's like a big part of that healing process. Yeah. I definitely feel like it should not be one or the other, right? Because there's definite, right? Like my wife identifies as a woman. She doesn't, I mean, if it's gender neutral, it does the same thing. But if she would like something that is gender specific, right, I think that that's fine. I think it's just making room for folks to be able to access products that are less triggering to help mitigate this situation. So it's not about saying like all the products should be gender neutral, right? Because there's definitely, I think, a lot of, like there's that sense of like positivity and raising strong young women, right? And so I think that that's important. But I think then you also just need to know that there are folks that are not, that product is not going to kind of cover, right? I guess that the product itself will, right, technically work, but when you have to buy it, and that's a constant reminder, and you have to get in line now at the store with these products, people are looking at you weird. It's like a whole thing, like psychologically. So I think it's like there's definitely room for both. Yeah, and I think that's interesting though, right? Is that like even as adults, why is this such a taboo thing, right? I think like that's the beauty of kind of what Eleanor is doing here, is just bringing this topic into conversation, right? And highlighting some of the like things like, why is that a thing? Why is that uncomfortable? Why is there shame involved in that? There shouldn't be, but there is. And so these are things like we need to work through, aside from trans and non-binary issues, right? Just as a society, to make this less of a sort of thing that people need to feel some kind of embarrassment about.
So this is the end of the recording. Thank you for coming and watching this. I'm going to end the recording now.